How did ancient humans care for children born special? Long before medicine, writing, or law, ancient humans kept alive the children who could never hunt, walk, or repay them. So why does the survival of the fittest story still tell us those children would have been left to die? 4 skeletons, spread across 70,000 years, and 2 separate species show exactly what they did instead. And tonight, we will explore that. The story most of us inherited is clean and simple. Prehistoric life was a brute contest, and anyone who couldn't pull their weight, hunt, run, or keep up on the march got left behind to die. It sounds like common sense. The problem is the bones. Archaeologists keep turning up people whose bodies should have killed them young. People born paralyzed, or blind, or with limbs that never grew the way they were supposed to, who nonetheless lived for years and sometimes decades. A body like that doesn't survive on its own. Here's how we keep this honest as we go. Bone facts get stated flat. His leg healed. Her limbs were short, because you can read those straight off the skeleton. Direct inferences get stated with confidence. So if a man couldn't walk, and he still lived to 15, someone had to carry him, feed him, and stand between him and anything that wanted him dead. But before going any deep, if this is the first time you're here, this channel exists to dig up exactly this kind of evidence, the parts of the ancient past that don't match what we assume. Subscribe if you want more of it, because the case for the pattern is about to get stronger. Then there's the softer layer, the love, the ritual, what it meant to the people who held him. Researchers believe that part, and so do I, but the bones alone can't prove it, so we flag it every time, rather than pretending the skeleton is whispering feelings it isn't. That's the method, and here's what it turns up. But the shorthand says the weak get abandoned. That ought to be easy to test. Therefore, that's exactly what we're going to do. Not with theory, but with the actual skeletons of people who couldn't have made it alone. Starting with a boy in a Florida pond who never walked a step in his life. In 1982, a backhoe operator near Titusville, Florida, started pulling skulls out of the mud at the bottom of a pond. And for a moment, everyone assumed it was a crime scene, because the bones looked fresh. They weren't recent at all. Radiocarbon dating put them at roughly 7,000 years old, Middle Archaic, buried in the peat of a pond that had slowly swallowed them over millennia. There were 168 of them, men, women, and children, wrapped in woven fabric and pinned into the peat with sharpened stakes. And the preservation was good enough that brain tissue survived in 91 of the skulls. One of those skeletons is a boy, about 15 years old, born with spina bifida. His bones were fragile, 1 foot was missing, and the stump of his lower leg had healed. Spina bifida like that almost certainly paralyzed him below the waist. A paralyzed boy in a hunter-gatherer band can't feed himself, can't flee a predator, can't carry his own weight on the march, and he lived to 15 anyway. But a child like that's pure cost to a foraging group, a mouth that never produces. Therefore, someone carried him, someone fed him, and the band let them do it for a decade and a half, because there's no other way to read 15 years of survival. And he wasn't set aside in death either, because children and teenagers at Windover were buried with grave goods of their own, carved wooden toys, tools, and woven textiles. This wasn't a society that tolerated its weakest member until he stopped being a problem. This was a society that dressed him for burial. But Windover is one band, 7,000 years ago, and tolerance by a tribe only explains so much. Therefore, push the clock back another 5,000 years, and the question shifts from whether a tribe would tolerate this to whether a family would love this child enough to hold her in death. Now go back roughly 12,000 years to the very end of the last ice age, to a rock shelter in the mountains of Calabria in southern Italy called Romito Cave. In 1963, archaeologists found 2 skeletons there in a shared grave, buried in an embrace, arms around each other. That detail alone would be moving enough. But the younger of the 2 had limbs that were severely shortened, a rare inherited form of dwarfism called acromesemelic dysplasia. For decades, nobody could say much more than that. Then, in 2026, a team from the University of Vienna and Liège ran the ancient DNA, and the grave got sharper. The 2 were mother and daughter, and the daughter was a teenager, somewhere around 16 or 17. And here's the honest part, because for years researchers thought the younger skeleton was male, and the genetic work corrected that, which is exactly the kind of revision we should want, not hide. A girl with that condition doesn't reach her mid-teens in an Ice Age world by herself. She was fed, kept warm, and carried through winters that killed healthy adults. But tribal tolerance explains a group keeping someone alive, and it doesn't explain a burial embrace. 2 bodies laid down holding each other. Therefore, researchers read this as something more personal than communal charity, a mother holding her daughter, though that's the softer layer the bones point toward but can't quite prove. This is the earliest genetically confirmed case of a genetic disease in humans. But both of these stories are still our species, Homo sapiens. Therefore, push past 40,000 years, where the caretakers stop being us and ask what kind of creature was already doing this before we existed. Now we leave our species entirely. Shanidar Cave sits in the Zagros Mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan, and in 1957, an archaeologist named Ralph Solecki pulled a skeleton out of it that the team nicknamed Nandi. He dates to somewhere between 45,000 and 35,000 years ago. And he isn't Homo sapiens. He's a Neanderthal. At a young age, he took a crushing blow to the head. It damaged his left eye, almost certainly blinding it, and it hit the part of the brain that controls the right side of the body. So his right arm withered to near uselessness, and his right leg was crippled. A bone in his right foot shows a healed fracture that would have sharpened an already noticeable limp, and a 2017 reanalysis concluded he was probably deaf as well. Every one of those injuries had healed, and none of them killed him. He lived to roughly 35 to 45 years old, which by Neanderthal standards was old. Think about what that means on the ground. A man who couldn't see out of one eye, couldn't use his right arm, walked with a limp, and likely couldn't hear, doesn't hunt, doesn't run from a predator, doesn't defend himself in a fight, and he survived decades anyway. That isn't possible alone. But here's the part that breaks the model. He wasn't a member of our species, and he wasn't cared for by our species. Therefore, caregiving isn't a sapiens invention, and a separate branch of humans already practiced it tens of thousands of years before us, because the Smithsonian states directly that he couldn't have survived without his social group. That pushes the behavior back past the split we usually credit with making us human, which means compassion may be older than our own species. But Shanidar 1 could still be one exceptional case, a single Neanderthal who happened to land in an unusually devoted group. Therefore, look at a second Neanderthal found in a different country entirely and see whether the same care shows up again. In 1908, 3 brothers named Bouissoni, working with a colleague named Bardon, pulled a near-complete skeleton out of a cave in La Chapelle-aux-Saints in southern France. He's known simply as the Old Man, and he was, by Neanderthal standards, ancient, somewhere in his 60s or 70s when he died. His body shows why that age was remarkable. He had severe, deforming osteoarthritis running through his spine, his hip, and his jaw, the kind of degeneration that would have caused him real pain and serious trouble moving for years before death. Researchers originally went further and argued he'd lost so many teeth that someone must have chewed or mashed his food for him. A closer look decades later corrected that specific claim, since he kept enough front teeth to manage on his own. And that correction matters, because getting caught overstating the evidence is exactly what this kind of research has to avoid. But strip away the overstated part, and the arthritis alone still tells you something. A man with that much joint damage in a mobile hunting group doesn't reach 60 or 70 by accident. Therefore, whatever accommodation his group made for him, a slower pace, a share of a kill he could no longer chase down himself, it held for years, and it held until he was old. And here's where the story turns ironic. When the paleontologist Marcellin Boule examined this same skeleton in 1911, he reconstructed the old man as a hunched, dim-witted brute, and that single reconstruction is a large part of why caveman still means stupid and savage in the popular imagination today. But the skeleton Boule used to invent that myth is, read correctly, evidence of the opposite. A group that kept a physically failing elder alive into old age and then buried him deliberately. Therefore, the fossil that built the brutish caveman stereotype is the same fossil that quietly disproves it. That's two Neanderthals now, discovered in different countries, both kept alive well past the point their bodies could keep up on their own. But two could still be an unusual coincidence of preservation. Therefore, push past individual skeletons entirely and look for the same choice showing up not in one body at a time, but across an entire population. In February 2024, a paper in Nature Communications changed the scale of this conversation entirely. A team led by Adam Rohrlach at the Max Planck Institute sifted through the DNA of nearly 10,000 ancient individuals, looking for extra copies of chromosomes. They found 6 children with Down syndrome and 1 with Edwards syndrome, the first Edwards case ever recovered from prehistoric remains. The sites ran from Bronze Age Greece and Bulgaria to Iron Age Spain, with one more in the 17th or 18th century churchyard in Finland, and the oldest was roughly 5,000 years old. All 6 Down syndrome children died very young, and only 1 reached about a year old, so their lives were short by any measure. But the burials are what matter. The 5 prehistoric ones were all placed inside the settlements, not dumped at the edge of the village, and some were given colored bead necklaces, bronze rings, or seashells. These were grave goods most people in those communities never received. Roberto Risch, an archaeologist working those Spanish sites, put it plainly. It appears as if these communities were purposefully choosing these infants for special burials. But a short life could be read as a failure to survive. Therefore, the burials say the opposite, that in site after site, across centuries, communities kept these infants, mourned them, and honored them, with placement that most of the dead never got, which makes this deliberate rather than tolerant. And here's the honest gap. Researchers can't yet explain why so many of these cases cluster at those Spanish Iron Age sites, so I'm not going to invent a reason for you when the people who found them don't have one yet. That cluster is a real mystery, and it's the sort of open question this field is supposed to leave open. Therefore, 5 cases, spread across 2 species and 70,000 years, keep landing on the same choice. It's time to say what it adds up to. Tens of thousands of years before medicine, writing, or law, ancient humans were already choosing to keep alive the children who could never hunt, walk, or repay them. And that choice may be the thing that made us human. The softest part of us isn't new. It's the oldest trait we have. And if this made you think differently about the ancient world, subscribe. The video on your screen right now goes even deeper. Watch that one next.